Hi, everybody. I'm Randy, and this is the Literate Texan, where we discuss literature, books, highbrow, lowbrow, everything in between. This month is October, which is also Victober, which means we're discussing Victorian literature. And in the Lone Star Book Club, we're discussing specifically Dracula, which is our book of the month. And every Friday, I'm posting a video with some discussion questions that you can respond to in any way you like. The comments below would be an excellent place to carry on this discussion. But if you want to make a response video, that would be okay too. As far as our schedule goes, you should be finished with about chapter 4 or chapter 5 by now. And then the next milestone to reach next Friday would be to be finished all the way through chapter 10 of Dracula. But I have highlighted certain things from my reading, and I'm going to attempt in this video to ask more questions than I answer, because my temptation is always to give my opinion on everything. But this is meant to be a discussion. That's the whole point of a book club. So rather than offering lots of opinions of my own, I'm going to ask lots of questions. I'm going to get right into this discussion of Dracula chapters 1 through 5. The first question, and this is maybe one of the most important questions, or the biggest or broadest questions, is what is the most unsettling thing about chapters 1 through 5? Or 1 through 4. Let's limit this question to chapters 1 through 4. Chapters 1 through 4 are where Jonathan Harker is a guest at Castle Dracula. Okay? So I don't think anybody's going to disagree that this is an unsettling experience for him, but it's also unsettling for the reader. But what's unsettling about it? I can think of several things off the top of my head. The sense of isolation. I mean, it's just him and the count there. There's no one else there. Also, the whole Dracula sort of perverts everything he touches and everything that he does. What would normally be considered hospitality from a host, with Dracula, is kind of a bizarre mockery of it, because it becomes pretty clear pretty fast that Jonathan Harker is not a guest at Castle Dracula. He's a prisoner there. So all the trappings of him being a guest there are just kind of a cruel mockery and a cruel irony that Count Dracula is performing for his benefit. One of the examples of this is, if you're a guest in my home, for example, you won't find a lot of locked doors. In Castle Dracula, you'll find nothing but locked doors. Also, there was all the stuff going on with the wolves throughout. That's interesting. Dracula, of course, is himself an unsettling character to interact with. But then there's also that incredible scene where Harker is shaving. But I've got some excerpted stuff here I wanted to read also. And I started highlighting stuff from the very beginning. This is from chapter 1, page 1. It says, "In the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe, I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of the Castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country as yet to compare with our own. I read that every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. If so, my stay may be very interesting." So from the very beginning, you see Jonathan Harker, and one of the things that I talked about yesterday, I made a video about how to read Victorian poetry, but we talked about the tension between multiple concepts. And in the Victorian age, one of the tensions that was society-wide was this tension between superstition and reason, faith and reason. And of course, London would be probably the height of modernity in the Victorian age, but he's traveling into the past, in essence, by traveling to the Carpathian Mountains. There's no maps of where he's going. It's some mysterious place. And not only is it some mysterious place in a literal geographical way, but also in a mythical or metaphorical way. Because like it says, it's like the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. It's almost like he's describing a mental or emotional Bermuda Triangle. in Transylvania. So that's unsettling just to begin with. I mean, imagine going to a place that's not on a map, and the rumor is that all the superstitions that you've ever heard about boogeymen are true. That's unsettling from the very beginning, right? So, also on page 1, I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night. Well, okay, you had dogs howling all night, not being able to sleep even though your bed's comfortable. That's no good. That might be unsettling. On what for me is page 3, I've got some stuff. It is the eve of St. George's Day. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know anything about things like St. George's Day. If you do, please explain in the comments below. But I only know what I'm reading in this, and I don't know. There is a question too. Jonathan Harker is the narrator of this section of the book, but how reliable of a narrator is he? That's a good question, since he sees some things that are arguably supernatural. But is it possible that he's just a little nuts and that we can't count on him to be telling us the truth? That's something to think about. But this was on page 3. It is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things in the world will have full sway? Do you know where you're going and what you're going to? This was one of the, I believe this was one of the natives talking to Jonathan Harker, who obviously doesn't know where he's going or what he's going to. And this is not set around Halloween. This is actually set in May, this section of the book. Let's see here. So he also talks about the crucifix. He gives him a crucifix, which, now here's that interplay between Victorian era, modernism, and reasonable thought and stuff in this crucifix. She took a crucifix from her neck and offered it to me, in some measure idolatrous. But it's ungracious to refuse an old lady. So he takes this crucifix, even though it's superstitious and idolatrous, but he takes it anyway. Part of it, he's claiming, it's just I don't want to refuse an old lady, but part of it is he's a little scared and he thinks this might protect him. But I'm not feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. So there you go. I mean, not only is the reader unsettled, but the main character is unsettled. And he's unsettled from almost the very beginning. Like I say, this is highlighted on page 3. Now, this was interesting to me, too, was he's hearing the natives use a bunch of words that he doesn't know, but he's got his little translating dictionary out, and so he's reading them. And I'm going to try to pronounce these as best I can, but I don't know if I'm going to do very well. I must say they were not cheering to me, for among them were Ordog, which translates as Satan, Pokal, which translates as hell, Stragoika, witch, Vrolok, and Vlukoslak, both of which mean the same thing, one being Slovak and the other Serbian, for something that is either werewolf or vampire. Memo, I must ask the Count about these superstitions. There's a nice little bit of irony for you, huh? But yeah, I thought that was a neat little section of the book where he lays out all those words that the natives are using to discuss, that he doesn't know what they mean, but he's looking them up. It's just getting creepier and creepier. That would not be cheering to me. Where else are we? Okay, so I'm still in chapter 1 of my highlights. I've highlighted so much of this and made so many annotations, which is actually really unusual for me. I annotate stuff, but I don't annotate a lot of stuff. I just annotate stuff that stands out to me. But there's a lot in Dracula that stands out to me. Excuse me, I get a little dry in the mouth because it's a medication I'm taking, so I have to drink during my videos. So let's see here. Where was I? Oh, okay. So eventually, unknown to Harker, the coachman, the person who takes him on the last leg of his journey to Castle Dracula, is actually Dracula himself. He doesn't realize this until later, of course. But, okay, so he's talking about the horses were coal black and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and a great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of a pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight as he turned to us. It seems cliched now. I don't know if it was cliched when Victorian literature was all about the Gothic stuff, but the idea of glowing red eyes is not a comforting one, okay? Not from the guy who's taking you on a journey to a castle in the middle of a country that's old and full of superstition and isn't on any maps, right? So, says he has a hard-looking mouth with very red lips and sharp-looking teeth as white as ivory. What a great description of the teeth for, I can say this, spoiler alert, I can say this, Dracula is a vampire. So it seemed to me that we were simply going over and over the same ground again, and so I took note of the same salient point and found that this was so. I would have liked to have asked the driver what all this meant, but I really feared to do so, for I thought that, placed as I was, any pretext would have had no effect in case there had been an intention to delay. Okay, so I didn't understand this, and it might just be Dracula messing with, playing with Harker. He's driving around in circles with these horses out there. He's not going straight to the castle. And it's not clear to me why, unless he's just playing mind games with Harker. Doesn't seem to me like mind games with Jonathan Harker are necessary at this point. But at any rate, that seems to be what's going on there, at least on the trip to the castle. And then they have the scene where they encounter a ring of wolves with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long, sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. So we're seeing a color motif throughout too of red and white. The red for the blood, and then the white for the teeth. We're seeing multiple times here with the wolves and with Dracula himself. So he was in the act of pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast, ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the moonlit sky. Okay, so he's going to this castle that's not on any map anywhere to conduct business with this foreign nobleman who he doesn't know anything about, and he gets there and there's no lights at all. The castle is in ruins, and you basically just see the silhouette of it against the sky, which is lit by the moon. And that's more or less where that chapter ends, is with them arriving at Castle Dracula. Woo, creepy stuff, right? And then in chapter 2, he mentions that he has not yet been able to see it by daylight. I don't remember what it was he hadn't seen by daylight there, but I highlighted that. But here he's talking about Dracula and his hand. His hand seemed like a steel vice that had crushed mine if he had wanted to. And I believe, Dracula's still acting in his capacity as the coachman and helping him with his luggage. So then when he gets in the house, he finds within a tall old man, clean shaven, save for a long white mustache, and clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of color about him anywhere. Okay, so Dracula, as the coachman, was wearing a beard. Apparently it was a fake beard or something, because, he's an old man with a white mustache. He doesn't have a beard when he meets him. So yeah, Dracula was in disguise earlier. His hand grasped mine with a strength which made me wince. Here's the strong hands again. An effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Okay, so I've shaken hands with people who's had cold hands or clammy hands or whatever, but not with hands of somebody as cold as ice. Think about that for a minute. Ice is cold. Can you imagine holding somebody's hand and it being cold as ice and also being really strong and gripping? Okay, that's unsettling just by itself. Shaking hands with a dead man is what he's doing here. His face was strong, a very strong aquiline with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead and hair growing scantily round the temples but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose. So he's got a unibrow like I do. And with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. So here we've got a guy, he's dressed all in black. The only color you see on him is his ruddy lips. It's the red and the white again, and he's got the very white teeth again. So, and then you got this classic, and this has been repeated so many times that it's become cliched. But imagine reading this before it had become a cliche. Dracula says, "Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." Okay, yeah, that's creepy, man. That's weird that you're so into the sounds that the wolves are making out there, dude. Later that night, he says, "I doubt, I fear, I think strange things which I dare not confess to my own soul. God keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me." This is him writing in his journal, of course. Then, he's having dinner. And one of the things, again, this mockery of being the host, whenever I've been hosted somewhere, my host always eats with me. In Castle Dracula, he never eats with Harker. He always makes sure that he's fed. He's always got a nice supper laid out for him, but he never eats with him. Of course, we know why. I mean, he doesn't eat food, or "I never drink wine." That's from the movies, not the book. But it says, the table service is of gold and so beautifully wrought that it must be of immense value. Yes, not only is this a mockery of hospitality, but it's an ostentatious mockery of hospitality. But a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know him not, and to know not is to care not for. So that's Dracula talking about how, even though his English is good, Harker's praised him for his English, it's not good enough. And when he moves to London, which is his plan, he'll be a stranger in a strange land. And that's why he wants Harker to help him with his English. But he's going to be a stranger in a strange land wherever he goes. He's Count Dracula, So that's just, we know that because we're readers and we're familiar with the tradition. Then this next one that I had highlighted was interesting too. Oh, let's see, where'd it go? I'm not always as facile with these devices as everyone else is. Dracula tells him you can go anywhere you wish in the castle except where the doors are locked, where, of course, you will not wish to go. We're in Transylvania, and Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there shall be to you many strange things. Nay, from what you've told me of your experiences already, you know something of what strange things there may be. So Dracula is already telling him, look, man, some of these doors are going to be locked, but you're not going to want to go there anyway. Turns out the whole castle, other than just this one little section that he's got set up for Jonathan Harker, the whole castle is locked. And Harker suspects this, but he doesn't realize it until later in the narrative. So, the state that Dracula is buying, the estate, is called Carfax. They talk about this a little bit. And Carfax is about 20 acres there in London. And part of what's on the estate is a very large house, only recently added to and formed into a private lunatic asylum. How about that? You're doing a real estate deal with a guy who's buying an estate, and the most notable thing about it is that there's a lunatic asylum on there too. Creepy. Here's something else unsettling. You imagine this. All right, you're in this dark castle with this strange guy in the middle of nowhere, and keep in mind you don't have a cell phone or anything like that out there. And he says, "I fear I am myself the only living soul within the place." Okay. So he's already determined or suspecting that Dracula is undead. Because if he's the only living soul in the place, then Dracula obviously isn't a living soul. So he's already starting to suspect that. And as we know, of course, he's right. But yeah, he's creeped out from the very beginning. But something about his, Victorian sensibilities and sense of politeness, and also, I'm from England and I'm supposed to be reasonable, and that's keeping him from fully expressing just how crazy and scared he is in his journal. Although by the time you get to the end of chapter 4, which closes this part of the book, he's practically ranting and raving on paper about how terrified he is. So that's at the end of chapter 2. He says, the castle is a veritable prison and I am a prisoner. So he realizes he's a prisoner in the castle very quickly. And then chapter 3, what did I have highlighted? This was odd, but only confirmed what I had all along thought, that there were no servants in the house. Well, yeah. Dracula's been putting out his meals and stuff for him, and he notices Dracula clearing his dishes and getting ready to do the dishes and stuff. And then he's taking comfort from the fact that he's got the crucifix, and he says, it's odd that a thing which I have been taught to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous should in a time of loneliness and trouble be of help. So he's taking comfort from the fact that he's got this crucifix, as he should. Dracula doesn't like the crucifix, and it's going to provide him with a certain amount of protection, although Harker, doesn't begin to try to make his escape until it's really too late anyway, man. He really puts it off, so I guess he thinks everything's going to go okay, or things are going to turn around or something. But this is nice here. This diary seems horribly like the beginning of the Arabian Nights. There's another reading group online right now, but if you're familiar with the Arabian Nights, the frame story is that she's got to tell a story every night, and it's got to be interesting enough that he's going to want to hear the story again the next night, or how it continues, because she's going to be put to death when he's through hearing her stories. So, my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and begin to crawl down the castle wall over that dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading around him like great wings. Okay, so here's the scene. You got, this is crazy. All right, so you're in this castle, and one of the things that I hadn't mentioned, but it's in the book, and if you read it, you probably noticed it. The castle's on a cliff, okay? So on 3 sides of this castle, there's just a straight drop from the side of this cliff. And then there's this courtyard and stuff that leads out. So anyway, you're in this castle on the edge of this cliff, and you're looking out the window, and you're creeped out already because, you've got this strange guy living there, and you see him, this creepy guy, stick his head out in a window below you in the castle, and then start crawling down the wall? Who does that? I mean, crawling down a wall like a lizard with all 4s, with his cloak looking like a cape. So if you weren't convinced that Dracula was creepy before now, surely by now you got to be a little bit unsettled. I thought this was incredibly unsettling. This was one of the scariest parts of the book to me. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stones, worn clear of the mortar by the stress of years, and by thus using every projection and inequality, move downwards with considerable speed, just as a lizard moves along a wall. Once more, I've seen the camp go out in the lizard fashion, so this happens later. He moved downwards a sidelong way, some 100 feet down, and a good deal to the left. He vanished into some hole or window. So Dracula's not even walking around in his own castle, he's climbing around the walls. So, yeah, and that's in chapter 3. Now, chapter 4 is where things get real weird. He finally decides to try to do something about his situation. And I haven't even talked about the 3 weird sisters, or the 3 women, Dracula's wives. I'm going to leave that for further discussion in the comments or in your response video. In fact, I'm going to wrap this up here in just a second. But, Harker does eventually try to escape, try to get somewhere. So he creeps out and finds Dracula lying in a coffin. There lay the Count. Okay, he's lying in a coffin. He's sleeping in a coffin. That's weird stuff, too. If you haven't seen Dracula movies before, which, of course, he hasn't. But it says, there lay the Count, but looking as if his youth had been half renewed. For the white hair and mustache were changed to dark iron gray. The cheeks were fuller, and the white skin seemed ruby red underneath. White and red again, remember? The mouth was redder than ever, for on the lips were gouts of fresh blood. Ooh, gross. Which trickled from the corners of the mouth and ran over the chin and neck. So it's not just blood, there's a lot of it. And it's not neat and clean, it's all over him. He's a messy eater, folks. Even the deep, burning eyes seemed set amongst swollen flesh, for the lids and pouches underneath were bloated. It seemed as if the whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exhausted. Filthy leech, lizard. You know, every time he talks about Dracula, he's basically talking about how inhuman he is. So anyway, out of all that stuff, of course, there was the scene where he's shaving and Dracula comes and gets mad and destroys his mirror. It seemed to me like Jonathan Harker was more irritated than he ought to have been by the fact that he wasn't going to be able to shave. Dude, you got more to worry about than whether or not you're going to be able to shave, but that must symbolize something. And I don't know what. Maybe in Victorian England, keeping clean shaven meant something different or was more important than it is now, but I thought his reaction to that was really odd. But then there's also the scenes with the Dracula's brides, which is just crazy. That's obviously the most horrifying, to me, the most horrifying part, where they've got what is obviously a baby in a bag that Dracula's brought them to feed on. It's just horrifying. So, but out of all that, what stood out to you as the most unsettling and disturbing parts of these chapters? That's what I want I'm hoping that's a trigger for discussion. Also, I've got a few notes that I've made here. These first 4 chapters are also an example of travel writing. Of course, it's fiction, but it is a gothic trap to be traveling. You know what? And the trip is pretty cheerful to begin with. He's eating these spicy chicken paprika dishes and hungry that he's never had. He's making notes to himself, hey, I need to be sure to get this recipe to take home to Mina so she can cook this for me. It's pretty fun to begin with. Also, I don't want to go into great detail about it because everybody that watches my channel is pretty sophisticated to begin with. But this is what's called an epistolary novel, which means that it's made up of letters and journal entries and newspaper articles and so forth. I discussed that with my daughter last night. She didn't know what an epistolary novel was, so I was glad to be able to discuss that with her and stuff. But, what would Dracula be like if it hadn't been written in an epistolary form? Would it be less credible, less creepy, more creepy? It's hard to say. But why do you think Bram Stoker chose the epistolary format for this novel? Do you think it was an important choice or not? I feel like it was, but talk about that if you like. I've already talked about it. The hospitality that Dracula is showing here is really inverted. It's really perverted and a mockery of what we would consider good manners. The mirror and the razor is a big deal. We've already talked about that briefly. I've just mentioned it because I want to leave something to talk about in detail in the comments, since I read so many excerpts and talked so much about so much other stuff. Also, Dracula and Jonathan Harker are the 2 main characters in these first 4 chapters, of course. But there are a lot of minor characters too, like the gypsies there in the courtyard and the wolves, and then during the first chapter when he's traveling, all the locals that he encounters. But there is another major character besides Dracula and besides Jonathan Harker, and that's the castle itself, I would say, is also a major character. Dracula's 3 wives, you might consider them major characters too. I think they're still minor characters, but I think the castle itself is a character. Why do you think that is? Why would I think it's a character? Why does it play such a big role in these chapters? That'd be something to talk about. So, what else have I got in my notes here? Some of these notes I look at now and I think, golly, that wasn't worth writing down. That wasn't worth discussing. The locals are depicted as backwards and full of superstition, but in this novel, they're right, okay? Their superstitions are right. Yeah, there is stuff to fear out here. And the old ways, the garlic, the crucifix and stuff, do offer some protection. None of that is scientifically based. That's all a matter of faith and superstition. And modern retellings might have spun that to make it pseudoscientific or quasi-scientific or whatever. But in the context of the novel and in the context of Victorian England, of course, this is just about superstition versus reason, and how the old ways not only could be a comfort, but they could also be scary. They provide their own comforts, in other words. What else? Time and the calendars. Okay, so yeah, one of the interesting ways to read this book, and I've never done it, but I've seen it done on Reddit, I think, is everything's dated. Okay, so there are people who will read Dracula that will start on the date that the journal starts, which I think is May the 4th, actually. And then they'll read the journal entries on those specific dates, which is not a crazy way to read this when you think about the fact that in the Victorian age, a lot of novels were serials to begin with. And so, I don't know. Yeah, I should have looked into the publication details a little more closely about the novel before the discussion. Maybe you know more about it and can share something in the comments or in a response video about that, or in our Voxer group where we're discussing the novel. But I don't know if Dracula was originally published in serial form or not, like a lot of novels back then were. But there's no reason you couldn't read it in serial form, and I can certainly see how the ends of these chapters are cliffhangers of a sort. I would want to keep coming back to it, so I want to know what's going to happen next. Of course, once you finish chapter 4 and you get into chapter 5, the scene changes. And I don't want to talk about chapter 5 too much because I think it's better fit for next week when we discuss chapters 5 through 10. But the scene changes and the main characters change to Lucy and Mina back in England. Okay, so even their personalities are dramatically different from Jonathan Harker's. Let's see here, what else? Anything else that I should be discussing here? Well, let's do this. What should I have discussed? What did I leave out? What did you notice about the first 4 chapters that I haven't mentioned or that I should have paid more attention to in this discussion? Talk in the comments. If you want to, let me know in the comments or just reach out to me on Voxer. I'll leave my contact information there in the description. Reach out to me there if you want to join the Voxer group. We have an active discussion going on there. It's been a lot of fun. We've been posting pictures of the editions of Dracula that we're reading. I, of course, am reading it on ebook, but I do have a Dead Tree edition, and I'm very proud of it. It's a Norton Anthology Critical Edition. Norton Critical Edition, not an anthology, but it's got lots of cool extra stuff in it, and I really like the artwork on the cover. So, but yeah, any way you want to participate, including, and I would definitely want to encourage you, if you can or want to make a response video to this. I'm going to continue to post these discussions on Fridays throughout the month. The milestone for next Friday is to have finished reading through chapter 10 of the book. And I look forward to discussing this with you at greater length in the comments or on Voxer or through your response videos. And until my next video, which I'll have more videos about other stuff between now and the discussion of Dracula next Friday. But before then, I want to ask you to do 2 things, of course, that I always remind you to do. Although the context might make some of this a little different. Stay sexy, folks, just like Dracula. And stay hydrated, just like Dracula. See you next time, folks.